Got it. Okay. Very
Thanks
good.
for
Thanks.
interrupting me.
Thanks, Allie.
Yes.
Yeah, so it looks like there's still people kind of coming in. Maybe we'll give it another minute or so, and then I can start sharing my screen. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. Awesome. Got some more coming in. So for those of you here already, I was just saying I'll start with a presentation and then we'll stop the recording and shift into Q&A. If you do have questions in the meantime, just jot them down and then we'll address those in the second half. I'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. So, for those of you I don't know, my name is Rachel Zarowin, and I am the Communications Manager for Circular Action Alliance Colorado. I'm super grateful to Allie and Recycle Colorado for offering this time and getting folks together to talk about producer responsibility in Colorado. Allie, was there anything that you wanted to share before I start sharing my screen?
I don't think so, but thank you for being here and thank you for keeping our members and non-members informed.
Heck yeah, excited to see everyone. Bear with me while I share my screen. It always takes me a hot second. And let's see. All right, so I think you guys should be seeing just the full screen presentation view. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Like I said, I'm Rachel Zarowin. I am the Communications Manager for Circular Action Alliance Colorado, and we're here to talk about an overview of Colorado's plan proposal. So before I get started, I do have a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, I am not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. So if you need legal advice, go ahead and talk to your attorney. The other thing too, just with a group of people, especially as we open it up to Q&A later, we will not be talking about prices, fees, rebates, nothing that can be considered in violation of antitrust. It's not been a problem before, and I can't imagine it's going to be a problem today. So we have a few folks there. Go ahead. I'll give you an overview of Circular Action Alliance. I would say if you're up for it, go ahead and put your name or change your title so we can see who we have on the call today. We'll be talking a little bit about what EPR and producer responsibility is looking like across the US. I'll get a little bit into how Circular Action Alliance is working with producers. And then the bulk of what we're going to talk about today is a Colorado update. We'll spend about the first half I'll be presenting, and then we'll stop recording and we'll go to Q&A. So save your questions for the end. I'll answer them as best I can. All right. So to get us started, what is producer responsibility? So producer responsibility is a policy approach, and what it does is it shifts the end of life management of products, so disposal, recycling, it shifts the cost of that process away from local governments and taxpayers, and instead to the producers who are making the packaging and paper. So at its heart, producer responsibility laws require producers in Colorado's case, fully fund the collection and sorting and processing of the packaging and paper that they're supplying into Colorado. EPR dues can be structured in such a way that they encourage sustainable design choices. And by sustainable, I mean they minimize waste altogether or improve environmental outcomes. So when we think about producer responsibility laws, how how does that get implemented? That's where the producer responsibility organization comes in, and that's who we are at Circular Action Alliance, is the producer responsibility organization. So at our core, the producer responsibility organization, we help producers comply with the law. We help them meet their obligations. So in order to do that, we develop a program plan to manage all the products covered under the legislation. And the plan that we create is reviewed by a state-appointed advisory board, and it's also approved by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, or CDPHE. Circular Action Alliance, we're dedicated to helping implement producer responsibility for packaging paper across the US. And we were founded by 20 companies whose logos you can see on the screen. And I think the logos speak for themselves and really show how much producers are in support of this work. So when we look at packaging EPR across the United States, Colorado's not alone, right? We have California, Oregon, Minnesota as well, where Circular Action Alliance is the responsibility organization. In just a minute, I'll get into some updates into the different states. But at our core, again, we want to help producers comply with the law, and we want to do that in a way that is harmonized across states, right? Because if you're a producer, if you can think of a producer who's operating across all these states, they want to know what their obligations are across all the states and be able to comply and report in a harmonized way. And that's what CAA is really here to do. And to do that, we work with communities, we work with businesses, and it's all in support of reducing waste and recycling more. So I promised we were going to talk about EPR across the states. So again, when we think about the foundations, what are producers required to do under producer responsibility laws? They have to join the producer responsibility organization. They have to collect their data. So they need to start to understand how much packaging and paper am I supplying into each of these states. And then they have to report that data to Circular Action Alliance. And then they pay fees, or in Colorado's case, dues is what we call them in Colorado. So they pay dues based on the amount of packaging and paper they supply into the state. The other thing to come out of this is that there's the potential redesign of materials, right? Because if you're using less packaging, you're paying less dues on the packaging because you're just not supplying that much as much into the state anymore. So there's the potential of more sustainable design. Where EPR laws do vary across state, you'll see across the states, is in terms of source reduction or maybe compostable materials and what that looks like. That varies across states. But again, Circular Action Alliance really seeks to harmonize where we can and then meet the unique needs of each state. So here in Colorado, we submitted a plan proposal, and it is a plan proposal because it's a draft, to the advisory board back on February 3rd. They've got 90 days to review it, and we're nearing the end of that 90-day period, so we should be hearing feedback soon. We're queued up to begin implementation in January of 2026. And then in California, Governor Newsom directed CalRecycle to redraft the regulations for EPR. So we're working with everyone there who's, all the interested parties to make sure we have a strong operating plan. Oregon, they're first in the nation. So their program starts on July 1st, 2025. And then in Maine, they're anticipated to select a stewardship organization, same as a producer responsibility organization. Maine calls it a stewardship organization in spring of 2026. And Circular Action Alliance does anticipate, putting our names in the hat for Maine as well. In Minnesota, they approved Circular Action Alliance as the responsibility organization in February. So they have a deadline coming up for registration. And then in Maryland, that bill for producer responsibility is at the governor's desk awaiting signature. So exciting times across the states. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how Circular Action Alliance is preparing producers, right? They're big programs. It's brand new in the US. And while we have great models that we've looked at in Canada and in Europe, it's new. So we're really there to support producers, right, as this comes online in Oregon and Colorado and across the US. And we think about it in terms of a producer journey, right? There's those 3 steps: to register and then report and then to pay. And when we're thinking about registration, what we like to tell producers is that even if you think you might be obligated, go ahead and register because that opens up a whole suite of services and support that only registered producers and their representatives can receive. So that's how we're supporting producers through their journey. If we do have any producers on the call, and I'm not sure if we do or not, but this is the link, this QR code is the link to the registration in the Resource Center. Like I said, registration is really that first step. So now we're on to the meat of what we were going to talk about, which is Colorado's program plan. So like I said, pardon me, I'm a little sniffly. Allergies or what here? So like I said, we submitted the plan proposal in February, and we're due to receive feedback here any day now. We are, we do have a non-voting member on that advisory board who's been monitoring what that feedback has been to date. And we're so grateful for all the energy and support that the advisory board has put into this process because it's been super thoughtful and really helpful in ensuring we have a good program for Colorado. These are all the chapters. We will absolutely not talk about them all. I am not an expert in all these things, but really where we're going to focus today is on communities and what are those chapters that apply to communities. So from a super high level, collection and recycling rate targets are included in the plan, and you can see them here on the screen. There's lots of rows, so I'm going to boil it down. And at the heart of it is that we're going to more than double our recycling rate for covered materials by 2030. So if you look in that second column, you can see the baseline recycling rate for covered materials is 25%. And then I just got to move my screen over here. And then by 2035, that's going to go up to 55%. So significantly increasing the recycling rate for covered materials. Now, keep in mind that this is a 5-year plan. So we will have plan updates along the way, but when we look at those 10-year goals, which are required, more than doubling the recycling rate. The other thing that's not on this screen is that producer responsibility will significantly expand recycling access to residents across the state, especially in underserved and in rural areas. So two of the biggest outcomes, right? Expanding access and increasing our recycling rate. So broadly, when we look at the Producer Responsibility Act, packaging and paper are those covered materials. There are, of course, exceptions. They're all detailed out in the law. And broadly, what the act does is that it breaks covered materials down into two lists. So on the one hand, you have the minimum recyclables list. This is the uniform statewide list of recyclable materials. Now, obviously, there's going to be some ramp up time, right? It's a dial, not a switch. And the intent is that Colorado is going to have this minimum recyclable list that everyone across the state will be able to recycle. The other list that the act puts out there and that's included in the program plan, is the additional materials list. So these may be items that aren't collected statewide yet. Maybe there's just not infrastructure across the state. And to put some perspective, I live in Silverthorne and we do not put coffee cups in our recycling bin here. So that's an example of something that it's currently collected in different areas of the state. There's a good responsible way of recycling it. And maybe it is through curbside, or maybe it is through drop off or other means. But the idea being that we're not quite ready to go there yet across the whole state. So it's going to be on the additional materials list. And over time, as infrastructure expands, thanks to producer responsibility, we'll see items transition from the additional materials list to the minimum recyclables list. So, okay, this is a big slide and there's a lot of information on here, but this is really producer responsibility in a nutshell. So I'm going to start us off in the gray. Hopefully you can see the colors. I live with someone who's colorblind, so hopefully you can see the colors. So gray is where we have producers and financing. So producers are required by law to fully fund the recycling services and infrastructure in Colorado, and they will do that by paying those dues that we talked about. Covered entities Those are the residents who will receive recycling services at no cost. The other thing to note is that over time, producer responsibility does cover some commercial. And what I mean by that is schools and public places, say parks or things like that, and then also some businesses as well. So those are the covered entities, the people who will receive recycling as a result of producer responsibility. And then everything in yellow, as we kind of go around the circle, is the elements of the system that will receive funding from the producer dues. So education outreach. It's a really big one, right? As we move toward that minimum recyclables list, we need a statewide campaign. We also recognize that there's a lot of organizations in Colorado who already do an incredible job with education outreach. And we know that collectors or haulers have an important role to play because they're in direct connection with customers. So all these layers of education outreach are funded through the system. Another big piece that receives funding is obviously collection. So whether that occurs because the local government has trucks and picks up the recycling, or whether that occurs because the community has a contract with a single hauler, or whether private business does all the collection in a community. That's what we'd call an open market community, right? Collection receives funding. And then when we think about where those recyclables go to get sorted and processed, that's post collection. Those facilities will have investment in those facilities. And then the other thing to call out in Colorado too is compost facilities. Now, while curbside composting is not covered under this program, what is covered is funding to reduce contamination and increase the recovery of covered compostable materials. So to put that into context, if there is a composter in Colorado who's currently accepting covered compostable materials, they say, hey, I'm having some contamination issues. I'd like a little help. So this program will help fund to reduce contamination. Another example might be a composter who doesn't accept compostables, but wants to start accepting them. There'll be funding available for that system and for that type of investment. And then the final piece that receives system investment is end markets. And what I think about end markets is where recyclables go to live their next best life. I know a lot of people on this call already know what end markets are, but I try not to get too steeped into the acronyms and alphabet soup. So REM, what does that mean? That's a responsible end market. And simply what that means is that it's sustainable and it's safe, right? We want to make sure that our materials are getting processed and turned into new items in a responsible and safe way. So Circular Action Alliance, as part of this program, will be investing in responsible end markets. So that is EPR, like I said, in a nutshell. I'm just going to do a quick time check. So we talked about the whole system investment, right? So how does that work actually execute on the street? We do that, a Circular Action Alliance will be doing that primarily through service agreements. You can think about this as contracts or service agreements with collectors or with communities to help or collectors, right? Post collection, right? The materials recovery facilities who are processing that material. So service agreements with service providers, essentially, is what we call them in the plan, to help execute all those investments that we just talked about. Education outreach, that's a big tool that we have to help educate people on what's recyclable. Increasing participation as well as proper recycling is going to be critical to meeting those goals. And then we just talked about all the system investment that the program provides. So when we think about other tools that we have to get this work done and really make sure we're hitting those goals, right? Doubling our recycling by 2035, we are doing robust data tracking, measurement, and reporting because we need to know what's working and why. And if something's not working, we need to fix that and we need to make it work. So that's a big part of this. The other piece that we have to help execute all this work is what's called eco-modulation. And you can think of that as a layer on the base producer dues. And what it does is it provides bonuses or maluses. So, in it, or potentially a reduction or an increase in producer dues based on whether or not, to give you some examples here, if we have a producer who says, you know what, I am packaging my toy truck in, and you can tell what's important in my life right now is birthdays and toy trucks. Um, they're packaging in layer upon layer upon layer of plastic and cardboard and zip ties and all the things, right? And they say, hey, you know what? Actually, I can just use a cardboard box to package this toy. They're reducing the amount of packaging altogether, and they stand to see benefit or reduce dues because they're reducing the amount of packaging that they're using. On the flip side, if you have someone who's producing a toy truck and they are packaging it in maybe layers of flexible film or something that's on the additional materials list, or maybe even something that's not even collected at all for recycling, they might see an increase in their dues based on what they choose to package in. So that's an example of eco-modulation, and it's a good example of how over time this work will reduce waste. So we talked about, first I'm going to talk about Colorado communities, then we're going to get into service agreements and how that works. So we know Colorado communities are unique. So there's really three important things under this that I want to talk about. And that is that under producer responsibility, communities will continue to manage their own recycling and solid waste systems. So like we said, whether it's collected by the community, whether it's contracted single hauler, or whether it's an open market where private business thrives, those communities can keep doing what they're doing. And that's fine. And then the other side of it is that there's no requirement for communities or service providers to participate in EPR. So we certainly hope you all do, and that's what we want and need, but Circular Action Alliance can't make anyone participate, and there's no requirement for anyone to participate. For the communities who do choose to participate in producer responsibility, they will be reimbursed for 100% of the cost of providing recycling to covered entities, right? So residents, to start. And what that means is that they can't charge residents for recycling anymore, whether that's the local government or whether that's, the waste hauler. Customers won't be residential customers won't be charged for recycling under producer responsibility. So these are three really important things that Colorado can continue to be Colorado under producer responsibility. So reimbursements, right? We talked about those service agreements as a key way to get this work done and to facilitate the reimbursement of collection services, right? So when we think about collection in communities, or really any reimbursement under this program, we're thinking about a three-step reimbursement process. So Circular Action Alliance will issue RFRs, these requests for reimbursement. And service providers, whether it's a collector or whether it's a community, will respond to the request for reimbursement. And we do hope, like I said, that communities and haulers across the state respond to these because increasing participation is a huge piece of reaching those goals. So once Circular Action Alliance receives those requests for reimbursements back, we qualify them, right? They need to meet minimum standards. They need to provide services, right? Provide those eligible recycling services. And then once they're qualified, the service providers, so the collectors or the communities, we establish an agreement, right? If you can think of it almost like a contract, right? And that's where we have standards for performance metrics, right? You got to talk about how many households you're serving and you got to be able to report tons recycled. So that's all part of that contracting or service agreement, signing that service agreement. So it's a three-step process. So what I want to talk about next is what might be some of the data or standards or requirements that Circular Action Alliance will need from the communities who want to participate in producer responsibility. Again, this is a planned proposal. We're going to be receiving feedback soon from the advisory board. And we know yet still that there's some basics, right? A community or a collector who responds to a request for reimbursement, they need to be able to tell us who provides recycling services, right? Is it the municipality? Is it a single collector? Is it multiple collectors? What's the isolated cost of providing recycling on a household basis, right? So what's the cost per household to provide those recycling services? Some communities may have that data handy, some may not. So this is a good thing to start thinking about. Number of household service, right? That's important to receiving reimbursement. Are you servicing 1,000 households or 300,000 households? It's a big difference, right? That's important. Also, knowing tons recycled and the destination of those recycled materials. So all these data elements are going to be important and basic things to know as communities start thinking about responding to those requests for reimbursement. So if we look at the timeline, right now, we're in that first board review. That 90 days is coming to a close. So pretty soon here, CAA is going to be cranking out revisions. Like I said, we have someone as in a non-voting capacity on the advisory board. So after listening into all those work group meetings, we have a sense of what's coming, and we're working on those already. And we'll have 60 days to get those in once we receive all the formal comments. After which there's another advisory board review. And after that, CDPHE begins to review the plan. They will issue a public comment period, and they'll have 120 days to then decide for approval or rejection. So what we're hoping for at CAA is a mid-December plan approval. And then once we receive a plan approval, we have 6 months to begin implementation. Not everyone receives free recycling because, again, it's a dial, not a switch. And within 6 months, still, we'll be implementing the plan. The other two key deadlines that I want to point out on the screen are July 31st. So that's a producer reporting deadline. That's when producers need to report all the tons of covered materials that they're supplying into the state, right? Because Circular Action Alliance, from all the needs assessment and background work we've done to date, we have an understanding of the system costs. What's it going to take to fund this new recycling system for Colorado? By July 31st, we'll have an understanding of what are the materials supplied into the state. And then that's when we finalize those producer dues. So the producer dues will be finalized on the 31st or published on the 31st of October, which is another critical deadline in this process. So, and then not on this screen, but producers, at least I don't think so, producers will begin to pay dues in January of 2026. So it's coming. We're not that far out. And I think that, oh no, okay, last slide, I promise. And then we'll have time for questions from you all. So I highly encourage you to scan this QR code. This is going to take you to our newsletter sign up. Make sure you can, if you're interested in Oregon and California, by all means, check all the boxes, but make sure you check the Colorado box, because then you can start to receive our Colorado email newsletters, which will start up next month. And certainly if you have any specific questions in the meantime, please, you can email our team directly at coloradoinfo@circularaction.org. And then I guess here's, oh, thank you. There you go. More websites and things. We will be at the annual summit for recycling. So super excited to join Allie and her team in Grand Junction for that, and many of you. So let's see, I will stop sharing. Oh, awesome. We had a bunch more people tune in. I couldn't see any of you, but now I can start to see all the different people online. That's great. So if you all have questions, I'm happy to. Oh, we'll stop recording for questions, but happy to field questions.